Alors, bonsoir. Ce soir, on va faire chapitre 6, partie 2. We're doing 6-2 this evening, and we're just going to jump right in. It's very fun stuff. Very, very fun. For some reason, I thought we had already done this chapter, or I thought that this context, this vocabulary context for this chapter, was earlier on in the book. So in the last chapter, I mentioned a lot of these little specialty shops that we're going to talk about tonight. So I am sorry if you didn't know what I meant. But you got a lot of fun information anyway, and we're going to go on and look at these little shops together now. So what I didn't do was I forgot to queue up the textbook to where I wanted it to be. Alors je vais le faire maintenant. Les petits magasins d'alimentation. I have never heard these called that, but that's okay. That is what they are. It's just kind of a almost clinical way of referring to these little well, what I call them is specialty shops that are in most French towns. In Canada, having only spent about 5 days in Quebec, in Quebec City, one time, I do remember that we saw a market. I don't remember a lot of little specialty shops. I remember a pâtisserie, and aside from that, a lot of the stores and restaurants and everything looked a lot like ours here in the States. In fact, I was kind of disappointed with Quebec because I really wanted it to be more like France. And it's kind of 2/3 of the way towards France and still about a third kind of like we do. So I think in a few lessons ago I said something about the fact that in Canada they have muffins for breakfast. So when you have the petit déjeuner pour ainsi dire continental, like we say continental breakfast, they would include muffins. And and I remember everywhere we went, muffins were on the menu, or if you stopped at a cafe, it was like muffins, and it cracked me up because muffins seemed very un-French to me, and I mean, they exist in France here and there, but it's not something you'll find everywhere. And so anyway, that's just one example. We went to a pub one time, and it really just felt like an American bar/restaurant. You know, you could have like pub food at the bar, or you could sit down. It was a little like a TGI Fridays. And there were some cafes, but they were a little different than in France, which is fine. It's Quebec. Quebec is supposed to be unique, and that's wonderful. So next time I go to Quebec, I will know, and I'm going to enjoy it more for itself. At the time, I hadn't been in France for about 10 years, and it was just, I was starving for French stuff. So, yeah, it was kind of a disappointment, but that's okay. Quebec is wonderful. And I didn't notice, as I said, that was a big digression. I did not notice these little specialty shops very much. I noticed a couple pâtisseries, as I said. I didn't notice anything like in France where you have boucheries, des boucheries, des charcuteries, tout ça quoi. That's not to say they don't exist. We had a hotel fairly close to the Chateau Frontenac, fairly close to Centre-Ville, which you're familiar with now, the Chateau Frontenac, because of your video. And so, you know, I'm sure there are lots of neighborhoods that have more specialty shops, and they probably do have a few, kind of like in France, but I can't tell you from personal experience. So somebody will have to find that out and let us know. Voilà. So this section will be largely about France rather than about francophonie. D'accord? A lot of the time we're able to talk about the whole francophonie in what we're referring to in the context that we're in at that time, but this time it's pretty much France, which rocks, but it will. So here we have a standard market. I started saying franglais. Most French towns do not have these open air markets all the time. They'll have one day a week when they have an open air market, and there will be a designated space in which they will have it. And in Tours, where I've lived several times, wow, I just blanked. I think Tuesday is the market, the standard marché like you see here, where you can get all kinds of produce and probably some other things too. Sometimes some saucisses, homemade or farm-made sausage, farm-made cheeses sometimes, but for the most part produce. And then there's another day that is the marché aux fleurs. So that's the flower market. And in Tours anyway, and not all towns have a flower market, but a lot of them do if they're big enough. The flower market is pretty cool. If you like flowers, it's just amazing to walk through it on your way to wherever you're going, on your way to class, as it was often the case with me. It's just amazing. So, and then some towns, if they're big enough, will have another space that's kind of like a constant market. In Paris, this is called Les Halles, and Les Halles was a market for ages and ages, a couple of centuries. And then it was kind of renovated, and now it's still a market, but also has a big mall attached to it. But if you go to the market section, it's open all the time. It's open every day, and you can go in there and get almost anything you want. You can get produce, you can get charcuterie, you can get, fish, meat for that dinner, meat for that night's dinner, whatever. And it's pretty amazing. Other towns, some towns have something like that and some towns don't. In Tours, there is actually Les Halles de Tours, and this isn't centuries old the way that Les Halles in Paris is, but it's a pretty cool place anyway. It's a big building, and if you, sometimes here in the States we'll have a big market somewhere in larger towns. 2 or 3 of the towns that I've lived in have a big market of some sort, and you can go into this big building that's kind of like a big warehouse, and they just have stands everywhere, stands and booths where you can go and get special things. So, again, produce, sausage, cheeses, whatever you might be able to get. So some towns are going to have something like that and some towns aren't. But every town, pretty much, that's big enough is going to have a marché one day each week at least, okay? And it's going to look pretty much like this. It's going to be chiefly produce. Alors voilà. It's wonderful just to walk through the marché for vocab. I learned a lot of vocab in the markets in France. But it's also just really cool to listen to people and to kind of watch people interact. It's a really cool place to people watch, kind of like almost as good as cafés. So voilà. Alors ici on a un marché, on va quand même faire un peu de français. Vous avez beaucoup de fruits, beaucoup de légumes. Vous avez un petit truc ici qui doit être un chien, mais it looks more like an armadillo to me. I guess because of the nose. Mais voilà. I'm not going to spend too much time on this vocab. You guys can study that. And as always, please don't study it until you're just blue in the face. Look it over a little bit, then jump in on your iLearn activities. If you're still looking at the vocab list, like every single sentence or something, then you know you need to go back and review it some more. But don't ever feel like you need to go and review this stuff just ad nauseum until you've got it down pat before jumping in on iLearn, because your activities are going to make you cement this vocab far better than drilling. Okay, the same thing for all the verb functions and all of our structures and all of our grammar stuff. So if you're not yet sick of my saying that, you probably will be by the end of the semester. Voilà. Alors ici, on a quand même, some of these are kind of wacky vocab though. Pastèque, that always threw me. Seems like such a weird thing for watermelon, n'est-ce pas? Une pastèque. And I just realized I've never looked up the etymology for pastèque. I bet it's really interesting. So if somebody wants to look that up and send it to me, I'll give you extra credit on the next quiz. So look up pastèque and find out where that word came from. And if you can, find out some kind of connection to it and the Germanic forms, various Germanic forms, including English, of that word. Pour les autres, vous avez eu beaucoup de ces mots déjà. Hein. Potiron, you probably have never had. This kind of, ça tombe bien, hein? We say this in France, in French. Ça tombe bien. This is a really cool French expression, actually. Oh. Ça tombe bien. Alors, ça veut dire que... oh, my muscle memory is dying. Oh, no, it didn't. Okay. Sometimes I start to do that enlarged thing and then I forget. And my hands are waiting for my brain to tell them when really my hands know it better than my brain. Alors, ça tombe bien is something that you say when it's like, oh, something is really opportune or serendipitous or it falls at just the right time or it's apropos or it's timely or it's maybe coincidental. Voilà. So les potirons, ça tombe bien because obviously we just passed Halloween and it's fall in general. So you guys can hear all of the... Okay. I was just looking real quick to see what Dr. Nikolova had to tell me. So potiron is not something you'll hear people in France talk about very much. I've never seen a potiron in France. I know they exist. I know they do. But I'm not sure that you're going to see a merchant selling a ton of potirons, a ton of pumpkins, all together like this. You may, you never know. But if you're looking for a pumpkin in France, and if you're there at Halloween, and you want to make a jack-o'-lantern, then potiron is what you search for. Pour les autres, c'est assez typique. Most of the rest of these are pretty typical for items that you would see in the market. Even pastèque in the summertime, etc. D'autres choses. Peut-être pas de mangue. De mangue. I was thinking in English. I've never seen a mango in a French market. I'm sure they have them occasionally. They're imported, sans doute. Because aren't mangoes tropical? I think they are. Anyway, the rest of these things you probably would see in a French market, but most of the French market is going to be pretty seasonal. So you may not see all of these exact things all together at the same time because some of them are going to have a slightly different season than other things. Et une chose, c'est la laitue. This is a word that most of the time French people don't call lettuce laitue. Most of the time French people just call it la salade. So if you're making a grocery list, for example, and you want somebody to buy lettuce, you would just put la salade. And salade by default means lettuce. If you're in a restaurant and ordering or something, then of course, if you're looking at the various salads on the menu, then it really does mean salad. But a lot of the time it means lettuce. And if you go to any of the little street vendors that sell sandwiches in most of the larger towns, not even the larger towns, but some of the smaller towns in France, a lot of the time you have a choice of lettuce on your sandwich, and always going to be salade. They're always going to call it that. So that's kind of interesting to have la laitue. You can say la laitue, of course. Everybody will understand you, but normalement, on dit la salade. Alors, on va passer quand même parce que je suis la reine des digressions ce soir. I don't know why I'm like digression city tonight, but that's okay. I really love all this food stuff, though, and all the market stuff, and all these little specialty shops. I love them. So here are a few. You have more in your vocab list, and you have more that we've talked about before. Une boucherie, une boulangerie, une charcuterie, etc. I've never seen them. Ben, si, peut-être. I might have seen a magasin bio. more often I've seen a section of the grocery where there were bio things. So a section in Monoprix where you can go and get all your organic stuff or healthy stuff, etc. Sinon, vous avez d'autres choses. A couple more that I wanted to just mention that should make total sense, and you should be able to understand what they are right away. La fromagerie, d'accord? Sometimes you'll see something called la crèmerie. Oh, qu'est-ce que je fais? Voilà. Now these are super, super, super specific, right? Crèmerie especially, we're not going to see that very often. I just want to show you really quickly. Fromagerie, you may see, especially in larger cities, there could very easily be somebody who is specializing in fromage. Peut-être, maybe not so much in smaller towns, but still a fair amount. And they're going to have other things too. They're going to have yogurt. They're going to have something we call fromage blanc. Du fromage blanc. Fromage blanc is actually almost exactly like Greek yogurt, except that in France we've had it for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. And it used to be a very, very big favorite for desserts. It was almost never used except for as dessert. And people would put honey or sugar or something and stir it in. And the first time I tried Greek yogurt here in the States, this big fad of Greek yogurt the last few years, when I first bought my first container and took a bite, I was, oh my gosh, it's fromage blanc! It was so incredibly yummy. So we're not talking the non-fat, okay? If you really want to taste what fromage blanc tastes like, don't buy the non-fat Greek yogurt, buy the full fat, the 100% fat or whatever Greek yogurt, and you will be able to taste what fromage blanc tastes like. So it's pretty amazing. Voilà. So there we go. Encore une digression, hein? On va passer au verbe. Oh, j'arrive pas à traîner le. Si, voilà. So these are stem changers. The stem changers, so-called stem changers, and we are going to switch to the PowerPoint in a little bit, but we'll go ahead and talk about these ourselves. The stem changers, the so-called stem changers, are always ERs, and I wanted to just show you. Some of you have studied verbs in this format, like they have for acheter and amener, where you have the singulars and then the plurals, singulars, plurals, etc., n'est-ce pas? And look at what's happening. So far they're just showing you these E accent aigu stem changers. Okay, there are a lot of E accent aigu stem changers, and then there are a couple of others that have to do with doubling a consonant. For now, you can just focus on these, and sometimes you won't have an accent and then you put it in for certain forms, and sometimes you'll have an accent aigu and it changes to accent grave for certain forms. Okay, but look at what's happening here. This is partly why we often tell you guys that, if you're studying verbs, try to make sure that you're looking at them in this kind of a format where you have the singulars and the plurals next to each other, because then you have the boot, the so-called boot, to depend on. And in high school classes, we used to actually tie a little bow at the top and show people that it looks like a boot. So, for example, je sais pas, si on faisait ça et ça. Now you can kind of see that this looks a little bit like a boot. This is easier to show you on a blackboard, but at any rate, you see what we're talking about. The boot forms always resemble each other, and this is not just for ERs, it's for everything. So if I have a stem change, it's going to happen in all four of these. And then what happens with the nous and vous? Nous and vous always resemble each other. And what else do they always resemble? Oh, l'infinitif. So if you need to kind of extrapolate with these, do nous and vous first, And then you can depend on what they're going to look like, because they're going to look exactly like the infinitive. Look at the accents here. Accent aigu, n'est-ce pas? Accent aigu, accent aigu. Tandis que, pour le reste, vous allez changer le deuxième accent en accent grave. The second accent is going to be changed to an accent grave for the rest of the forms. And again, they are all resembling each other. And not only that, but with ERs in particular, they're going to be pronounced exactly the same. Préfère, 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 préfère. N'est-ce pas? But again, nous and vous are always going to look like the infinitive. And a lot of these patterns are going to happen with other verbs too, even some of the irregulars. So anytime that your head can kind of latch on to something very visual like this, it's going to love it. Okay, just trust it. So over here we have acheter, and acheter changes the accent. Actually, we add an accent grave for the boot forms. D'accord? Same thing with emmener, je veux dire amener, pardon. Vous allez ajouter un accent grave sur le E, n'est-ce pas? Tandis qu'avec espérer, préférer, we already have an accent aigu, and we're simply changing it to accent grave. And the same thing applies. We're doing that for the boot forms. Tandis que nous et vous, ça ressemble l'infinitif. D'accord? So really think about these patterns and let your head grab onto that stuff. Our heads love any time they can have some kind of visual, some kind of graphic thing to help remember stuff. So yay. Alors, oh, qu'est-ce que je fais? Non, mais vous voyez, j'ai du mal à traîner ce soir. No, really. There we go. My cursor was kind of having a little crise a couple of months ago, but now it seems okay. But I was afraid for a second it was going to do it again. On va continuer un peu avec le vocabulaire avant de faire le PowerPoint, d'accord? Alors, regardez exercice A. Vous avez deux choix pour chaque indice. Vous allez entendre une série de petits magasins. Qu'est-ce qu'on achète dans ces magasins? So if you need to stop the video now and look at your vocab list to refresh your memory about what, especially don't look at the vocab list on 238 and 239. Look at the one at the end of the chapter. So you can look at all of those specialty stores. D'accord? And you can decide where would you buy these items. Okay? Alors, on y va. 2 secondes pendant que je cherche mon script. Voilà. So again, pause the video in between if you need to, or after I say the cue, so that you can take a second to think about it before we do the answers, because I've been digressing so much tonight that we're going to go really, really fast. Numéro 1. Une pâtisserie. Qu'est-ce que vous achèterez dans une pâtisserie? Alors, bien sûr, c'est B. Un pain au chocolat. Qu'est-ce que c'est bon. This is again, these chapters are making me so hungry. It feels like we've been talking about food like all semester, have we? I really feel like we've been talking about food since Doomsday, honestly. Voilà. J'arrête pas d'avoir faim pendant ces cours. Hein. Numéro 2, une charcuterie. Qu'est-ce que vous achèterez dans une charcuterie? Alors, un saucisson, n'est-ce pas? We talked about charcuterie. We're just going to take another little digression. We talked about charcuterie a couple of lessons ago. And what I said was, it's a little bit like a deli. Also, it's going to have, a lot of the time you would go to a charcuterie rather than a boucherie if you want to buy pork chops or ribs or something like that to cook. Most of the time they're going to have pork. A boucherie might have pork. It depends on the town. Sometimes if there's no charcuterie in the area, the boucherie will go ahead and kind of expand what they normally carry. But a boucherie you definitely would go to for beef, lamb, all kinds of other things. But you might have a charcuterie in the area, in which case the boucherie is probably going to leave the pork items mostly to the charcuterie. But also you're going to have these items like saucisson, which are ready to eat. Okay? And that's more the deli side. And you can walk in there and get a sandwich, kind of like you see on, I don't know, The Sopranos or something, where they I'm kind of a Sopranos fanatic, where they go in and order a sandwich made. But a lot of the time, you simply order a saucisson and then a bunch of little ready-made salads. Oh my gosh, it's so good. and you just order a certain number of grams of each one. Or if you're not sure of grams, being Americans, we don't always know what grams are doing. So they'll have little containers. And you can say, oh, this much carottes râpées, this much je sais pas quoi, d'accord? So they'll have all kinds of little salads and things like that. It's a fantastic place to go if you're getting ready for a picnic. You can just grab everything you want pretty much and then go to the fromagerie, which should be hopefully fairly close, and then go to the boucherie, get the bread, and you'll be all set for your picnic. So un saucisson, c'est ce qu'on achèterait dans une charcuterie. Numéro 3, une poissonnerie. Qu'est-ce que vous achèterez dans une poissonnerie? Alors bien sûr, vous allez acheter des crevettes dans une poissonnerie. Numéro 4, dans une boucherie. Justement, n'est-ce pas? On vient d'en parler. Un steak. C'est ce que vous achèterez dans une boucherie. Un steak, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 5. Qu'est-ce que vous achèterez dans une boulangerie? Dans une boulangerie, vous achèterez une brioche, n'est-ce pas? If you're here, if you saw the class from maybe the last time or possibly the next to last time, we actually saw some pictures of brioche. Oh là 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 là, qu'est-ce que c'est bon les brioches! Oh! So you all have heard about croissant, and that's the big thing that everybody knows about French people eating. But brioche are probably just as popular in France as croissant. They probably have just as much or more butter in them, probably more. And they're so incredibly yummy. There are a lot of really good brioche recipes. So if you find a brioche recipe and you really like to cook, you should totally try to make it because they're so incredibly good. Numéro 6, qu'est-ce que vous achèterez? Non, on vient de faire celui-là. Qu'est-ce que je fais? Oh non, si, numéro 6. Qu'est-ce que vous achèterez dans un magasin de produits bio? Alors, dans un magasin de produits bio. Des fruits biologiques, n'est-ce pas? So you would get organic fruit in a store that specialized in healthy stuff or organics or whatever. Numéro 7, qu'est-ce que vous achèterez dans un marché ou au marché en plein air? Au marché en plein air, vous achèterez des fraises fraîches, n'est-ce pas? Fresh strawberries versus frozen strawberries. Et dans une épicerie, qu'est-ce que vous achèterez dans une épicerie? Des céréales, n'est-ce pas? So we didn't talk about the épicerie. We talked about it a couple of lessons ago. These are kind of like neighborhood groceries where you can buy all kinds of things. Things that you could buy at the specialty store, but also other things. So if you need to go get, laundry soap, whatever, they're going to have a little bit of everything. They're going to have a little produce section. They're going to have a little bit of bread. Normally they get their bread from the local boulangerie. So they're not going to have an endless supply. But you can pretty much go there and get anything that you would need to set up for dinner or something, and pretty much anything you would need on a daily basis, including cleaning products, etc. Voilà. Alors, on va sauter au PowerPoint, je pense. Voilà. Because I'm really digression-y tonight. I kind of wanted to do another audio activity. Let's go ahead and do C. On va faire exercice C, d'accord? Vous allez nommer un aliment qui correspond aux descriptions que vous allez entendre. Oh, you know what? We're not going to do that one. But I do highly suggest that you do, highly recommend that you do that one on your own, because it's really good to come up with your own vocab. Get the vocab list handy and go through what you would associate with the descriptions that you get. D'accord? Attendez, je vais regarder le script quand même. Maybe we will do it. Oh, they're all kind of generic. It's not like there's one specific right answer for every single one of them. Some of them there will be an obvious right answer, but some of them you might have several possibilities. So just listen carefully, and you'll come up with ideas. Have your vocab list in front of you. D'accord? Alors, comme j'ai dit, on va sauter au PowerPoint parce qu'il va falloir faire la grammaire quand même, des structures, n'est-ce pas? So, the last section in chapter 5, we learned passé composé avec avoir, which is our first way of referring to past tense. And, attendez, voilà, et je vais faire que ça soit plus grand, voilà. We learned that you use avoir conjugated plus past participle, right? And I hinted that you would have another kind of passé composé later, and that's today. Yay! So, meaning-wise, these versions of passé composé don't mean anything different. What I mean is, when we were talking about passé composé avec avoir, on avait l'exemple, par exemple, j'ai étudié. D'accord? And I said it means I studied. Oh, pardon. Oh là là, voilà. Ou bien, I have studied. D'accord? Or I did study. D'accord? It means all three of these things, and you would just kind of tell by context if you were translating. If you're speaking in French, the various nuances that we use these versions to show are going to be shown by tone sometimes, by adverbs included in the sentence sometimes, or by other things. So that's what we mean by figuring out from context which one of these would be accurate. But as you're listening to these, in English, we really have these nuances spelled out for us. In French, it would be almost unconscious that you would get a certain nuance from somebody who was saying j'ai étudié and they meant this, they meant I did study. They're going to have something else in the sentence showing you that emphasis, d'accord? And you're not going to fixate on it. And we don't necessarily fixate on it, but what I mean is you don't have anything in the verb itself pointing to that different nuance, d'accord? All of these are entailed in this one form, get out of the way, in this one form of French, okay? Of French passé, French past tense. Alors, the same thing is going to happen with the passé composé that we're doing now, except that you're going to use être. Alors, oh, qu'est-ce que je fais? Voilà. So, être plus past participle. And with agreement. D'accord? That means that you're going to use your very first adjective endings that you ever learned on your past participle. You're going to treat the past participle as an adjective. D'accord? So we'll see more of this in the PowerPoint, but what I mean by those very first endings you learned, when we had masculin, nothing. Oh, qu'est-ce que je fais? Right? Féminin normally had an extra E, right? Oui. Masculin pluriel, qu'est-ce que je fais? Voilà. S, ouais. Féminin pluriel, vous avez eu ES. Okay, so those are your super very basic adjective endings that you learned way back when. And these are the only endings you're ever going to need on your past participles with être. D'accord? So one more thing I'm going to mention is, you know what? No, I'm going to mention that after the PowerPoint. Voilà. So anyway, I did want to say, what do you need to review? Let's do a new one because you guys. Okay. To review before I learn. D'accord. What do we need to review first? You definitely need to review your forms of être. That needs to be absolutely automatic before you jump in on your iLearn and before you can expect to do être, passé composé with être very successfully. I promise you, you do not want to be stopping every 2 seconds to check on your conjugation for être. You're going to have plenty of other things to worry about with this form. Not that it's extremely hard, but there are things to think about with it that you don't have to think about with the avoir one. So you're going to want to be able to focus on those. So do yourselves a favor, go back and review être. If you can't just kind of do être off the end of your tongue at this point, you really need to go back and review it. After all this time, you should really have être pretty much automatic. So go review être. Also go review your adjective endings, and review what we mean by agreement on your adjectives a little bit, if that's throwing you at all. Okay? And the other thing, it's a good idea too to look at passé composé with avoir. D'accord? So that's going to help you with the format. There are some major differences, as I said, but if you have passé composé with avoir kind of refreshed in your head, it's going to be easier to jump into passé composé with être. D'accord? Voilà. On va faire le PowerPoint alors. Attendez. Voilà. Chapitre 6, la partie 2. On va faire par oh, you know what? I should have started at the grammaire. Attendez. Voilà. Alors, pour parler du passé, we're going to continue with past tense as we said. Now, instead of doing passé composé avec avoir, on va faire le passé composé avec être. D'accord? Alors, in chapter 5, last section as we talked about, you learned to use passé composé with avoir. Okay? Some verbs cannot use avoir. A lot of verbs need être instead of avoir. Okay? So as we said, let me look at my little no. Instead of avoir plus past participle, you're going to simply have être plus past participle with agreement. D'accord? So that's going to happen with these 3 verbs and some others. Aller, partir, sortir. So what we mean is you're going to form the past participle exactly like you normally would. Do what you would normally do with an IR, do what you would normally do with an ER, etc. And then you're going to add adjective agreement, and we're going to see what that looks like in a few minutes. So, passé composé avec aller. Attendez, pardon. Voilà. Passé composé de aller. You see how this is going to work. I have my E accent aigu because of my ER, remember? Aller is irregular, but in this sense, it's going to act like your verbe du premier groupe ER verbs, right? You're going to drop the ER and add an accent aigu, or if you like to think of it as changing the ER to accent aigu, that's E accent aigu, that's fine too. And then look what's happening. I might have agreement on the end. D'accord? So, if this person is feminine, je suis allée, par exemple, si c'était moi, par exemple, je suis allée à la fac. Okay? So if I said that in a sentence, I, being female, would need to put an extra E on the end. D'accord? So same thing with tu, if it's a female, n'est-ce pas? Ils, elles, ont, you might need the E, you might not need the E, depending on who you're talking about here. Nous and vous and il, elle pluriel, you're always going to need the S. Oh, sorry, not always with vous, because as we know, vous can just be plural singular. But you're definitely going to always need the S on nous and il, elle pluriel. Ouais? And then you might need an extra E. So you see how these are working. Oh, pardon. So, as we said, the past participle must agree with the subject in gender and number, just as if it were an adjective. And that's going to be key for kind of a little tip that I'm going to give you in a little while. So think about the past participle being pretty much the same as an adjective. D'accord? And you guys have always made agreement with adjectives, so now you're going to make agreement with past participles too. Here's some examples. Monique est partie hier après le déjeuner. Partie avec E, parce que Monique est féminine. D'accord? Pierre et Guy sont partis avec S il y a 2 heures. Pierre et Guy, pluriel masculin, alors S. Okay, so remember our endings back here? We said masculine plural, just an S, right? So that's what's happening here. Sont partis. Normally I would just have my I for a past participle with an IR verb, right? And even though partir is one of our wacky irregular IRs, that's what it's going to do too. And then you're going to add your adjective ending for third person plural masculine. D'accord? In negative sentences, it's going to do the same as with avoir. Okay, so this is another reason why I said to go back and review passé composé with avoir, because most of your formatting is going to work exactly the same. The main difference is going to be that agreement on the past participle. So ne pas goes around the conjugated verb, and I told you guys last time, or 2 times ago, to think of that auxiliary verb as your conjugated verb. Okay, your past participle is not conjugated, just your auxiliary is. And just like when you were doing present tense in negative and you put ne pas around the conjugated verb, you're still putting it around the conjugated verb. So what it means is you don't have to think about a new rule. Okay, you can just think about the same exact rule, except it's applying to a different verb, because now our helping verb is our conjugated verb. Vous avez des exemples? Il n'est pas allé au marché. Elles ne sont pas, ne sont pas sorties hier. N'importe quoi, ces hommes. So here we have your ne pas where it's supposed to be, and then look at your agreement. Il, singulier, nothing, right? Elles ne sont pas parties, vous avez ne pas autour du verbe conjugué. Then elles pluriel, alors es. Okay? In questions with inversion, the same thing is going to happen with this as what happened with passé composé avec avoir. So again, go back and really review all of your passé composé with avoir stuff, because a lot of the time this is going to dovetail right into that, and you don't necessarily have to learn something new. Again, the only difference is your agreement. So let's look at some examples. Êtes-vous allé à l'épicerie? Okay, so obviously they're talking to a plural group, and we have an S here. But your format is exactly the way it was with passé composé avec avoir. Okay. Julie est-elle partie à 6 heures? Alors partie E. And because Julie est féminine, bien sûr. But we have the same exact format that we would have had with avoir. Okay? So try not to think of that stuff as new. It's just falling right into place with what you hopefully knew already after 5-3. Many of the verbs that take être and passé composé deal with motion. This is true. Here we go. So here's a lot of the ones that need être for passé composé. Aller, arriver, descendre, devenir, entrer, monter, mourir. So devenir and mourir you might not see necessarily as motion verbs. Think of those more as transition verbs. Okay, they definitely deal with some kind of transition. Or you can think of them as state of being. Okay, so how is something? What is the nature of something? D'accord? So if any of that stuff helps, cool. If you figure out your own mnemonic, that's cool too. And there will be a mnemonic a little ways later, which we will show you for all of the être verbs. Alors voilà, vous en avez beaucoup d'autres. Here's the rest of the list. Naître, partir, passer, rentrer, rester, retourner, revenir, sortir, tomber, venir. D'accord? So when we were talking about prendre a couple lessons ago, and then we said, oh, whenever you need to conjugate anything that has prendre in it, you're going to do exactly the same thing. Same thing's going to happen here with venir. Anything that has venir in it is definitely going to take être as its past participle, as its helping verb for passé composé, and it's going to be conjugated the same exact way. So my ending is going to be the same, etc. D'accord? And a lot of the être verbs actually you can put re in front of. So they have revenir here, retourner, etc. So we can say repartir, etc. There are a lot, ressortir. There are a lot of verbs that you can add re to. In general, you can add re to a lot of verbs, even if you've never seen them written down. French people do this all the time. So when in doubt and you want to say doing something again, you could probably go ahead and try putting le in front of the verb, and they would at least understand what you meant. Voilà. So I think that they've shown us all of the être verbs. So I'm going to go ahead and show you this mnemonic. There are 2 or 3 ways of remembering the être verbs. D'accord? So you can look these up online too, and they'll have lots of different graphics for you to look at. So one big way is Dr. and Mrs. Vandertramp. Oh, bubble. Okay, you have to spell it with 2 P's, and you can't spell out the and. But basically, all of these verbs are incorporated in this mnemonic. Okay, so if that helps, cool. If you want to, you can Google the house of être. We used to tell people that anything you can do in a house, not really, but kind of, you'll see what I mean in a second, you're going to use être for the passé composé. So what we mean is going upstairs, going downstairs, going into a room, coming back out of a room, leaving the house, coming back in the house, dying, being born. I can't think of any of the others, but that's, and actually, let's go ahead and see. I bet we could find a really fun one. Qu'est-ce que je fais? Alors, attendez. Bon ben. Why am I drawing a blank with this? This is so weird. Okay, here we go. Okay, there we go. So if we say, for example, that you're going to have a ton of graphics here that you can choose from, and if one of them just really clicks for you, or you think, oh, that one is super clear, so here's a bunch of ways to look at. This is what I'm talking about for the house of être. There used to be one that was kind of my favorite. Well, here's the one from Tex. You can go on Tex and look at their house of être, and it's based on the Alamo, which is funny. And there used to be one that I thought was just the best one. It was very distinctive. I don't see it today. Let's go ahead and look at the one for Tex. Okay. Well, this is the one from Tex. They've stolen it from Tex, basically. But here we go. We have mourir, partir, descendre, sortir, tomber, to fall, n'est-ce pas? Passer, naître, rester, rentrer, arriver, etc. D'accord? Vous avez beaucoup d'exemples ici. And you can see exactly what each one of them is doing. And if you want to, you can look at all of this in a house as well. Here's one that's kind of cool. I remember this one from some time. I'm not sure when. Let's look at this one. Ils vont nous montrer. Oh, that's a different one. Oh, they're showing us a whole bunch of houses of être. Alors, where's the one I was talking about? This one actually gives you the past participles with each verb, right? So you can see descendre, monter, arriver, sortir, partir, etc. D'accord? So take a look at those and grab whichever one clicks the best for you. You know, if it has funny pictures and that just makes you really remember être, passé composé, then fantastic. If you kind of like the more cut and dried one, then cool. Alors, on continue. Note that passé can take either avoir or être, depending on the meaning. So if I'm talking about, oh, on est passé à l'hôtel, par exemple. On est passé chez Pierre. D'accord? So that means to go by their house. Oh, we went by Pierre's and we said hi. We went to this hotel. We went by this hotel, etc. But if you're talking about passer as in spending time, j'ai passé 1 heure à parler à Monique, par exemple. D'accord? I'm going to use avoir. Okay? For those of you who just really love grammar, once in a while there are some students that say, you know what? give me the grammar about this, because that is how I'm going to remember it. Basically, être is being used for all verbs that cannot take a direct object. Okay? Now, this seems just like, oh my gosh, why did she even just say all that crazy grammar jargon? If that's how you feel about what I just said, then cool. Don't remember it. Remember the other things that we say about this. But if you're one of the people that just really loves to latch onto grammar, and that's really how you can remember this stuff the best, that's why we're using être. We're using être with verbs that cannot take a direct object. Okay? When we have a verb that takes a direct object, we use avoir. So that's what's happening with passer here. When I say passer à l'hôtel, je vais passer chez Monique, etc., I cannot use a direct object with passé in those contexts. But if I say, oh, I spent 4 days with John at the beach, I'm using a direct object right there, and I'm going to use avoir. J'ai passé 4 jours avec Jean à la plage. Quelle chance! So some examples. Sarah est passée par la bibliothèque ce matin. Now you could use a here too. You don't have to use par. Sarah a passé 3 heures à la bibliothèque. So she went by the library and then she spent 3 hours there. Okay? Mes 3 heures are my direct objects. So again, if that helps you, cool. If it just makes you go, oh my gosh, my head is spinning, she just used grammar jargon, then please just disregard those rules and just memorize and you'll be fine. Or not memorize, you know what I mean. Study them well enough that you can jump in on iLearn and then keep going back and forth to try to cement them as much as you can without sitting and drilling them. D'accord? Partir et quitter. Quitter is the same kind of thing. Quitter takes avoir because it always has a direct object. So, j'ai quitté Paris ou je suis parti de Paris. Okay? Je suis parti de Paris. I left from Paris. I departed from Paris, or I left Paris. In English, we would just say the same translation for both. But quitter takes a direct object, so it has to use avoir. Some examples. Nous sommes partis jeudi matin. Elle est partie pour Québec. Vous avez quitté la maison, nanana. Et Luc a quitté sa femme. C'est triste quand même. Okay? So here we have direct objects. Here we don't. Okay? Descendre, monter, sortir. If they're followed by a direct object, then you have to use avoir. So these are like passé. They're going to go back and forth. And what we're talking about is using descendre instead of coming down as getting down. Okay? Monter, same thing. I can talk about monter as in going up the stairs, going up to my room. Or I can talk about it as in putting something up high. Or sometimes just mounting something. If you're mounting your flat screen TV on the wall, you would say monter. Okay? And that's where we get the word mount, for that matter. Sortir, same thing. Je peux sortir la maison, par exemple, moi-même. I can go out, I can leave, or I can get something out of the fridge, or of a cupboard, or whatever. J'ai sorti le beurre du frigo. Okay? Some examples. Heidi est descendue de la montagne. She descended herself, right? She came down. Elle a descendu l'horloge de sa chambre. She brought the clock down from her room. Okay? So you're taking something down as opposed to coming down yourself. Les copains sont sortis hier soir. Ils ont sorti leur argent. They can go out, they went out, or they got something out, or they took something out. Okay? Si par exemple vous allez au guichet automatique, au distributeur, je veux dire au distributeur automatique pour à la banque, n'est-ce pas? Pour prendre le liquide, you need to go get cash at the ATM. Vous dites, oh, j'ai sorti de l'argent du distributeur automatique. Ok? Voilà. Et c'est bon. Très bien. On va regarder des exercices, je veux dire. So, qu'est-ce que... Oh, faut que je regarde mon planning. Et là... F, G. On va regarder... Oh, there was one other thing that they mentioned in the book that they didn't mention in the PowerPoint that I did want to mention. They were talking about amener et apporter. So both of these mean to bring. Okay. But one can be used with people, and one has to be used with things. Alors, amener, and this is a stem changer, or apporter. Okay? So to bring something somewhere, or to bring someone somewhere. Okay? So amener, to bring someone. Okay? Apporter, to bring something. Okay? So if you're going to a potluck, you would use apporter, unless you're bringing a guest, in which case you would use amener. D'accord? So that's what this first activity, and since we're really running out of time because I was so hungry when we were talking about those specialty shops, I couldn't stop talking about them. And it's one of my favorite things about France is to go to those little shops and go into a boucherie, go into a boulangerie, etc. C'est super, hein? Ouf, c'est super, super. Et ça donne faim. Et c'est ça, ça sent si bon, c'est pas possible. Hein? They all smell amazing. Alors, so I'm going to let you do this activity on your own. Just remember that amener is going to be for people et apporter pour les choses. D'accord? On va continuer alors. Exercice G. Vous avez ça. Est-ce que j'ai un script pour celui-là? Ah non, c'était pas ça qu'on voulait faire. Pardon. Exercice J, pardon. So I think that's still on the next page. On y va, on y va. Voilà. Exercice I ou J. On va quand même aller tout droit, aller tout de suite à l'exercice J, hein, à l'activité J. So look at your endings. As we said, your subject and your adjective are going to agree, just like an adjective, your past participle, I'm sorry. Your subject and your past participle are going to agree, just like you did with adjectives way back when. And now I'm going to tell you my little secret trick. I'm starting a lot of new post-its today, but it will. So, here's the deal. In the past, you've always used être, at least the vast majority of the time, you've used être, plus adjectives, right? Now, for passé composé avec être, you're using être with past participles, right? And what's happening is you're basically using your past participle as an adjective. So si je dis je suis, ou bien je vais faire que ça soit évident que c'est féminin. Alors voilà. Elle est, par exemple, elle est partie. Okay? So look at what's happening. This is exactly the same as when we learned our adjectives way back when and we said something like elle est grande. What? I was at elle est grande. Same thing. Here's my ending. Here's my ending. So what's happening with être is that être is like the equal sign in an equation. Okay? Now, this sounds really dorky, but I've had so many students over the years who said this helped. Think of être as an equal sign. Être is like the center of a scale. You know, those scales that they have like on court buildings, you know, with the two basket things. I can't describe it. On either side with the, you know, the chains or whatever. And you put weights on one side and you put something in the other side to figure out how heavy it is. Excuse me. So être is like the center of that. Être is like the fulcrum between those two things that you're weighing, okay? It's like the equals in an equation. So if I have masculin, féminin, right? If I have être in the middle, what happens is I'm always going to have masculin, féminin on one side of être, then I have to have masculin, féminin. Oh, pardon, qu'est-ce que je dis? Masculin singulier. Oh my gosh, I'm just saying n'importe quoi ce soir. Hein. Voilà. Masculin singulier, pardon. Masculin singulier d'un côté, vous allez avoir masculin singulier d'autre côté. So if I have masculine singular on one side, I've got to have masculine singular over here. The same as I would with an equation, right? So if I have 4 equals 2 plus 2, right? So 4, same thing as what's on this side of the equal sign. Same thing as what we're talking about here. So if I'm saying something like nous sommes intelligents, oui, we have nous, and in this case we're assuming it's masculine plural, and we have masculine plural here. And the same exact thing is going to happen when I use passé composé with être. Nous sommes, je sais pas, descendus. We came downstairs. Okay? Masculin pluriel, masculin pluriel. Okay? So think about être as an equal sign. Every time you use être, this happens. Because the vast majority of the time when you're talking about être, it's talking about the state of being for something or describing things, right? So whatever subject you're talking about has to equal whatever's happening over here. I'm going to make agreement accordingly. And the same thing happens then with passé composé avec être. I'm going to make agreement just as if, get out of the way, just as if it were an adjective. Okay? So really think about that. And that can help a lot when you really watch for être. And once in a while later, you will not use agreement with être. Very, very, very rarely. At the moment, don't worry about it. But those are the only exceptions. When in doubt, make agreement around être. D'accord? So that just probably will help a good many of you. If it just freaked you out, then just like I say with everything, what you need to do is grab the stuff along the way that helps. The stuff that doesn't help so much, no worries. Leave that stuff by the side, à côté, and don't worry about it. So what's happening with J? And I really don't like how little this is. Voilà. Voilà. Exercice J, we're actually inputting a subject to match, our past participle. Alors numéro 1, vous allez est tombé à l'hypermarché hier. So this is great. You really have to recognize your ending and know what the ending is doing. So what's the ending doing with this one? Feminine singular. Qu'est-ce que vous allez mettre? Eve, Luc, Eve et Luc. Eve, bien sûr. So again, pause the video if you need to because we're going to go really, really fast since we're late. It was those darn specialty shops. They just make me so excited. I want to go back to France. Let's go back to France. Bon bah, on peut pas y aller. Bon, moi du moins, je peux pas y aller ce soir, tout de suite là. Très bien. Numéro 2. Sont allés avec S, alors, à la pâtisserie, alors, masculine plural, right? Yves, Tom et Yves, Anne et Alice. Tom et Yves, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 3. Nanana est resté dans sa chambre. Do we have an ending on the end of this one? No. So we're defaulting to masculine singular, right? Roger, Rose, Roger et Rose. Alors, c'est Roger. Again, pause the video if you need to give yourself a chance to think of it before we do the answer. Numéro 4. Nanana sont passés par un café. D'accord? Passer ES, alors, c'est féminin pluriel. Vous avez les choix. Marc, Marc et Guy, Kim et Diane. Bien sûr, c'est Kim et Diane. D'accord? Numéro 5. Nanana sont revenus du supermarché. Revenus avec S, alors, masculin pluriel, ou peut-être un groupe mixte. Don't forget that even though France is the birthplace of feminism, French is nonetheless very, 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 oh, I just lost my word. It's not fair. French is not very fair. Why can't I'm blanking entirely. So anyway, when we have a mixed group, we're treating it as masculine plural, right? So, Nanana sont revenus du supermarché, Franck et Anne, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 6, Nanana est devenu célèbre avec eux, n'est-ce pas? Alors, féminin singulier, Laura, Kofi, Laura et Joël. So, if you don't know that Kofi is a masculine name, you don't know who Kofi Annan is, for example, then don't worry about it. You have a feminine singular right there in A. Alors, c'est Laura. Laura est devenue célèbre. D'accord? Oh, no. There was one other one that I really wanted to make sure we did. It was super fun. I know, you guys never agree with what I think is fun. Mais voilà. Actually, O is pretty cool because O is pretty cool. But let's do P, and then we might go back and do O if we have time. To me, P should be before O. Pourquoi j'ai... Oh, Suzanne. Voilà, très bien. Alors, pour exercice P, deciding between avoir or être. Okay, and this is going to happen sometimes. You're trying to say something and, oh my gosh, do I need avoir for this verb or être for this verb? And then as we saw, some of these verbs that take être can actually take avoir sometimes. So you might have to stop and think about those. Numéro 1. Alors vous allez remplir avec nous sommes ou je veux dire, soit nous sommes, soit nous avons. Ok? Nanana, parti à 11h. So basically, is this an être verb or an avoir verb? And it's an être verb. So again, pause the video if you need to. Nous sommes partis à 11h. Numéro 2. Aller au supermarché. Nous sommes allés au supermarché. N'est-ce pas? Acheter des fruits biologiques. Nous avons acheté des fruits biologiques. Ok? Numéro 4. Passer par un parc. So look at this very carefully. Par un parc. So it's not a direct object, those of you who are loving that grammar thing. And so you can just default to what you would normally think with passé. If you're in doubt with those verbs that we said go back and forth, if you're in doubt, go ahead and use être with them. It's not going to block comprehension if you're talking to a native speaker. But little by little, you should try to get to know those a little better so you can really read. And you need to basically read the rest of the sentence. So this is where a lot of vocab comes into play. I think sometimes students tend to think vocab is totally separate from what we do with the grammaire, les structures, and a lot of the time we do kind of stress them that way. But there will be a time when you really need to know what sentences mean in order to do the grammar, right? So this is an example of that. If you don't know what par means, for example, you're going to be sunk here. Nous sommes passés par un parc. Numéro 5, fait un pique-nique. Nous avons fait un pique-nique. Numéro 6, manger des fruits et du fromage. Our beautiful, friendly partitive articles there. Alors, nous avons mangé des fruits et du fromage. Numéro 7, nous avons bu de l'eau minérale. Numéro 8, nous sommes rentrés chez nous à 16h. Je veux dire, si, à 16h. I don't know why it's hard to say a different number. Mais voilà. À 16h. I should tell you guys I really don't know my numbers. I'm kidding. I know my numbers. Let's go ahead and look at that other activity really quickly. Even just to get you guys started on it, because it's a really helpful activity. I think. Moi, je pense. À mon opinion. Alors, c'est activité O. Vous allez choisir entre, this time you're kind of doing the opposite. They're already showing you whether you're using être ou avoir for your helping verb. And you have to decide, what does that mean about about the rest of the sentence? Does it mean that I need a direct object? Or does it mean that I can't have a direct object? Okay, so remember we said that être verbs are verbs that aren't taking a direct object. The verbs that go back and forth, it's because sometimes they take a direct object and sometimes they don't. Okay? Numéro 1. Claire est partie. So we have être. We can't use a direct object. Look what's in B. Son appartement. Okay, that's a direct object. As soon as you see something like that and there's no preposition in between, you can usually assume that it's a direct object if there's a person or a thing coming right after the verb. So in this case, être, I cannot use direct object. Claire est partie à 8h. Again, pause the video if you need to, so that you don't get so that you can think about the answer before we give it. Numéro 2, Claire a sorti. So it's using avoir. I have to have a direct object. Son livre. D'accord? So for part B, and this is a good way to do this as you're doing your review, or even now as you're getting used to these, to look at the other choice and decide what you would need to do to the verb part of the sentence to make that work. So when we had Claire est partie à 8h, okay. If we're looking at this one, we wouldn't necessarily be able to use partir, but I could say Claire a quitté son appartement à 8h, right? We learned that quitter and partir mean the same thing. Claire a sorti son livre. If we wanted to end the sentence with avec un bien, we would simply put in être. Claire est sortie avec un bien. Claire est descendue du métro. D'accord? Être, so I can't have a past participle. What am I going to do if I want to say une lampe? Claire a descendu une lampe. So basically, she got it down off of a shelf, or she brought it downstairs from upstairs, or something. D'accord? She brought it down, got it down. Claire a monté avec Robert ou l'escalier. L'escalier, n'est-ce pas? Vous avez besoin d'un objet direct, n'est-ce pas? Tandis qu'avec Robert, avec Robert, vous auriez besoin de être. D'accord? So if I wanted to use it with avec Robert, I would say Claire est montée avec Robert. She went upstairs with Robert. Ok? On va s'arrêter là, je pense. As I said, really go back and let's look at your little review plan. Where is that? Where did I put that? Oh. To review, before you do I learn passé composé with être, go back and review être. Again, you've got to have être automatic in order to really be able to use être with passé composé avec être effectively. You do not want to be stopping every single time to remind yourself about how to conjugate être. And if you still can't conjugate être off the top of your head, I give you permission to be ashamed of yourself. Because at this point, everybody should have être down pat. It's not very often I tell you guys to learn something down pat, but just by using it over the months that you've been learning French, seeing it in context and using it in various sentences, you really should have it down by now, even just unconsciously. So be sure and go back and review that. That's all I'm going to say about it. Why did I write that way? I don't know. Adjective endings. Adjectives and endings. That's what I meant to write. Why didn't you say anything? You guys never say anything during these classes. Go back and review your very first adjectives and their endings. So again, if you're just really confused about adjectives, what do you mean agreement? Hopefully nobody's thinking that. That's really sad, actually. Agreement? I didn't know I had to do agreement. If that just sounds completely foreign, or if you just think, oh, I probably need a refresher, go back and look at your very first adjective lessons and the endings that you needed with them. And as we said, you just need your basic endings. So nothing, E, S, ES, right? On va tirer que ça soit, oh, I don't like it when it does, there we go. And go review passé composé with avoir. Including all of those format things that we saw in the PowerPoint. So how to use it in inversion, how to use it with a negation, how to use it with all kinds of other things. Because those format things are all going to be the same when you use passé composé with être. Okay? The only difference is you're going to have agreement on the ending of your past participle. Okay? Voilà. Alors, on va s'arrêter. Attendez. Oh, si. Okay. all of a sudden I thought, oh my gosh, the Camtasia icon isn't there anymore. That'd be very sad. Voilà. Alors, ce soir, je vais faire le quiz. Et several people have had trouble getting the quizzes up to now completed. I know there have been various quiz due date changes, and I know that's very bad. And I'm very sorry for the confusion that that has caused. Therefore, I am not averse to reopening some of these so that you can go back and complete them if you didn't have a chance to do so before. There will be a slight point reduction on some of them. So this weekend, that's on my list for this weekend. I'm going to reopen a bunch of those, and you can have a chance to go back and do those. I'll probably leave them open for a couple of weeks so that you can kind of use them as a kind of a preview before we get any closer to the end of the semester. And you can hopefully kind of use some of them as a check to see how well you still remember those grammar points before we get to the final. The final is going to be comprehensive. It's going to focus more on stuff from the last chapter, on stuff from chapter 6, but it is going to have key items from previous chapters too. So don't forget that. And these quizzes will be a good way for you to go back and kind of go, oh, how well do I remember chapter 5 stuff? How well do I remember chapter 4 stuff? Etc. And there was one other thing I was going to mention. I guess that was the main thing. Don't forget your oral exam, and I don't remember off the top of my head when it's due. I did give you a couple extra days just because things have been so crazy. And I will have your compositions back to you after this weekend so that you can start working on your next one and have an idea about what your own personal goblins were as you were writing and things that you specifically need to really keep an eye on as you're writing, things that you maybe messed up more than other things. So voilà. Alors, bonne soirée. Allez réviser tout ce dont on avait parlé. Oh là là, j'arrive pas à parler français ce soir. Oh. Et puis, bon, c'est tout. Je vais faire le quiz ce soir, comme j'ai dit. Et puis, dites-moi si vous avez des questions quelconques, des problèmes quelconques, comme d'habitude. Et bonne soirée. Alors, allez, salut, au revoir. Je vais fermer Camtasia d'abord.